So the second episode, we're going first things first. We gotta cover the tip of the day or the tip of the podcast, and that is when it comes to weapon skins. You should really look for stats before you look for skins. You want to find a weapon that you're good with before you look for a skin for it. With the introduction of war paints in the Pyro update, you really need to be careful with what you're putting war paints on, what you're choosing to make what you're choosing to put stats on your skins. Like when it comes to weapons like the shooting star, even though it's a fantastic skin, some people don't like using the Machina. So you have to keep a lot of stuff like that in your thought process when you decide on buying a skin. A few good skins have to do with the festivizers and stuff. And as Christmas approaches, festivizers are going to hit the market again and be a lot more accessible. And a few of my favorite festivizers, the Backburner, which we talked about last episode, and I also really like the Ambassador.
I thought it was heresy to use the ambassador.
The Ambassador's, it's a give and take weapon. If you're using the weapon, then you're probably seen as a tryhard. You can use the Ambassador if you want to. If you know you can hit headshots, it's a great weapon because it allows you to hit headshots. But if you do not think you can reliably hit headshots at a close range, even though it seems pretty easy, you should still stick with the regular revolver or other things like the Diamondback, because getting free crits for backstabs and random crits can sometimes be better than having to hit headshots.
But back to the weapon skins. For all of my RPG players out there, it's kind of like how some equipment is better than others, but it's really ugly, so you kind of have to just deal with it until you get better equipment.
And you can do a lot of things to try and pimp out weapons that you really like. So if you have a strange SMG and you want to make it look better, a Festivizer is a great tool for that. And let's say you have a strange regular Zapper. One of the best reskins is putting the Festivizer on the Zapper, which makes it look like a present. So when you stick it to a sentry, it looks like you left a present. And while we're on the subject of Zappers,
Oh yeah.
that is today's topic. We're going to be covering the Zapper. And one note before we get into anything else that I really want to cover is Valve's sort of loss when it comes to weapon creation for the spy. A lot of his weapons are utility or change how you play him, but when it comes to the Zappers, I feel like there's only two.
Yeah.
There's the stock and then there's the red tape recorder. There's not much
That no one uses.
There's not much to choose from, and when you're using the red tape recorder, you're only doing it to annoy the engineer since it doesn't destroy the building as fast. It's you only have two options, and I think there should be more options in the future. Something that Valve should work on updating and helping out with this spy, definitely. But the stock Zapper, which is much better, arguably, depends on who you ask, which is most people. The stock Zapper is better because it does more damage. It has a regular amount of health. It's just the Zapper. It's a tool that not many people think about, like the construction PDA. You don't really think about how it affects gameplay because it doesn't affect gameplay all that much until you run across a sentry. The stock Zapper, you don't use it against other players, and in MVM, you don't even use it all that much. Well, I mean, if you are playing Spy in MVM, which is a moderately...
There are better classes.
There are better classes to play. Like Pyro, the new update gave him a big boost in MVM.
You're going to want more AoE than single target damage if you're playing against a bunch of bots.
Yeah. So when it comes to the Zapper, it doesn't have many utilities. It's basically just...
Kill the sentries.
It's just kill a sentry, destroy a dispenser, stop a teleporter, those three things. It's just buildings. And so there needs to be more ways for it to be variable and cooler to play and more fun to play, because the current the fight between engineers and spies has grown very stale. There's a few things that the engineer has against the spy and a few things that the spy has against the engineer, and those things don't vary as much as something like Soldier versus Pyro. Soldier can equip the man treads to make him go faster in midair. The pyro, like there's a bunch of interweaving weapons that you can use, making combat extremely varied, like in fights. But when it comes to a spy versus an engineer, you know exactly what's going to go down. Spy's going to zap the sentry and start shooting. The engineer is going to attempt shooting the spy back and then disabling this zapper. And there's not a lot of variation, but there are a few tactics that do allow you to have fun. And the first thing is, how do you use a stock zapper as a new player? And as a new player, the best way to use the stock zapper, put it on a sentry and pull out your pistol. That's just the way that things go. If you don't pull out your pistol right after you apply the zapper, if you hold your zapper out, then the engineer is going to attack you.
And we mentioned this in the last episode, talking about our new weapon ideas and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so that's just the best way to play spy for new players. If a new player wants to have fun, one thing that's a lot of fun is going to a teleporter entrance and zapping it. The engineer is probably going to be at the exit. Most people will think to immediately zap the teleporter, but what you should do is put a zapper on the teleporter, wait for the Engie to destroy it. When he does, teleport through. There's a very small chance that the engineer is going to be standing on top of the teleporter as he's destroying it.
And when you teleport through, it kills whoever's standing on it.
It telefrags them. They immediately explode. And it is one of the funnest kills to get in the game, but it's important.
So don't stand on teleporters if you've just killed a sapper.
Yeah. And another thing to keep in mind is you definitely want to be disguised when you're going through the teleporter, because if they have a sentry that's within view of what just happened, it's not going to hesitate to just immediately get rid of you.
Yep.
And so when it comes to having fun, telefragging is great. It's great fun for a spy, and especially like invading Engie nests is a lot of fun. The red taper recorder doesn't really have that much utility, like aside from de-leveling buildings. But when it comes to the stock zapper, it does damage until the building is destroyed, no matter what level it's at. And you can assist with its progress by shooting the buildings. And that's something that not a lot of Engies do. I'm sorry, not a lot of spies do. Is if the engineer immediately goes to remove the zapper, spies think, oh dang, should I go to apply another zapper, or should I start shooting the Engie? What should I do? And
Why not shoot the building? There's a third option.
There's a third option. You can shoot the building, and that'll allow it to be destroyed almost immediately, but that immediately makes the engineer focus on you. So depending on...
Have a cloaking device.
Have a cloaking device ready. And another thing to keep in mind is if they're a new player or not. If they're a new player and they pull out the shotgun, then they're just going to hunt you down and they're going to let the zapper take its course. If they're an experienced player, they'll hit the zapper once and then chase you down with the shotgun. And that's much harder for newer spies to deal with. But the stock zapper is good at doing damage. And sometimes moving into tactics for advanced players, that can be really helpful in team coordination. If there's a level 3 building that's guarding a choke point, and all of your team is crowded there, just say, all right, guys, when I give you the go ahead. And you go and you zap it, which disables the sentry and starts doing damage to it. The damage will assist with them destroying the sentry, as well as it being disabled allows your team to just get past the choke point. So it's definitely one of the more excellent tools when it comes to breaking through heavily defended choke points. And another thing is, as an engineer...
I was about to ask, what do you do if a spy is trying to do that to you?
Well, it really matters how heavily the team is stacked. If you're an engineer and a spy is doing that to you, then if the team is not heavily stacked, it's an even match. Then you might be able to get away with just removing the zapper and killing the spy and not having to worry about anything. But if the team is heavily stacked, you don't have many teammates helping you out, and they have a lot of teammates coming through the choke point, sometimes it is best to just let your sentry run through its course, because if the faster you can set down a new one in a safe place, the more likelihood you have of surviving and continuing to defend rather than dying and having to wait to come
It's
back.
kind of like how in chess sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win the game. Sometimes it's better to let a building die than yourself.
And your building is very easily replaceable. It's an important thing to remember as NG that your building is not you. Your building can be rebuilt at any point, and that goes for all of your buildings.
And
so sacrificing yourself for a building is not a...
you are going to have a longer respawn time than it would take to just rebuild the building in a safe place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so moving back to the stock zapper for advanced players, another really fun thing to do when you're an advanced player is to take the zapper. And I don't know if they patched this or not, but I once saw a video. It allowed you to kill your zapper after you put it on a building. And so you can, if an engineer is nowhere near his building, you put the zapper on the building, and the NG freaks out, and then you can just play mind games with the NG, just like every time they leave to go do something, you put a zapper on their building,
and when they start coming back, you just kill it.
And another funny thing is, sometimes you don't want to zap that sentry, because if you can get behind an NG and then undisguised, the sentry is going to turn and start firing in your direction, and if you're directly behind the NG, you don't need to get a backstab, the sentry is going to kill the NG for you.
So it won't. You can use them as a human shield. Basically.
You can use them as a human shield. You can do the same thing for dispensers too. If you hide behind a dispenser, the sentry will keep shooting at the dispenser until it's destroyed. And it's a lot of fun to do that. But it requires intense, positioning, and you have to be very good at dodging the engineer and making sure that you can stay away from his sight lines and the sentry's sight lines. And finally, some fun tactics for all players, like just a funny tactic overall, is spy crabbing. Pulling out your zapper or your knife or your disguise kit, whatever you want to pull out, looking straight up and just crouching at the enemy team. And most people frown upon that, and they'll immediately start shooting you because, that's weird. But if you're a new player, it's important to notice that spy crabs generally aren't trying to kill you, they're just trying to have fun. So by you killing them, sure, you're going to get a lot more points, and sure, you're doing what your team probably wants you to do, but you're also ruining the fun for another player. And if you ever want to spy crab yourself, just remember, what comes around goes around.
Karma.
Being friendly is a great part about the game, being a friendly heavy, being a friendly spy. There's just a lot of, throughout the entire lifespan of Team Fortress 2, there's been a lot of fun ways to just not do anything and have fun.
Yep.
Yeah, and
in other games before, if I start crouching and the other person's crouching, I will purposefully not kill them, even if I could easily kill them, because they're being nice to me, so they get to live.
Yeah, it's also great if you're an advanced player and you want to use spy crab to get out of a tough situation. Let's say you just destroyed an NG nest, but you see a pyro around the corner. Quickly just pop into a spy crab and hope to God he's not friendly killing tryhard.
Yeah, so if you have no other outs, spy crab and hope for the best. If you're gonna die anyways, might as well give it one last shot.
It is okay for an NG to kill a spy crab who just destroyed his nest.
Yeah.
Players will hold a grudge, so you can't always friendly out of a situation. So it's important to if it's a last resort, it's a last resort. And then those are just some fun tactics for players. Spy crabbing is something that you can do with most weapons, but with the stock zapper, its reskins, it's a lot of fun. And then finally, we're gonna go over a weapon idea that I had. It's not the baguette zapper.
That's next episode.
That's gonna come out with the red tape recorder episode.
Hint, we've got an entire bakery set for you guys.
Yeah, like I said earlier, the spy doesn't have a lot of weapons, so
we're gonna change that.
We're gonna change that. We have a lot of weapon ideas that would be really fun, kind of funny too.
Yeah.
They're mostly silly ideas, but this one I actually really like. This is like a magician set I came up with. This is the zapper for the set. And so it's called the hat trick. And what it is it's a zapper that looks like a hat. You put it on a sentry and it doesn't start destroying the sentry. It doesn't disable the sentry. and it doesn't alert the NG that there's a zapper on it. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to pull out the other part of the zapper after you've applied the first one. You can only have one at a time, by the way. You can't put it on multiple things.
Mm-hmm.
You put it on a sentry or a dispenser or a teleporter even. That would be kind of funny. And you can put it somewhere else. Now,
like pulling a rabbit out of a hat.
yeah, like this. Once you put the zapper on, you get a little tool which allows you to replace it wherever you want. And if it's a sentry or a dispenser, it'll get zapped. It'll get disabled, and it'll be disabled. It can't do anything, and that's to prevent players from putting a sentry like really close to blue spawn and no one being able to stop them from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part of the zapper is like if it's a teleporter, it doesn't disable it because it'd be pretty funny to have a player walk through a teleporter and you decide where it goes to.
Yeah.
And yeah,
like right next to a cliff, and they just
right next to a cliff. That happens a lot, especially if the NG's kind of mean.
Mm.
But like another part of the zapper is you cannot do damage to a zapped building. And so this is to keep spies from just teleporting it all the way away and just shooting it.
Mm-hmm.
Your teammates can still do damage to it, and it's still stunned if it's a dispenser or a
But the spy who did it can't.
Yeah, the spy who did it cannot. So you have to rely on your team and like where you put the sentry in order to like make sure that it actually gets destroyed. Plus you're very vulnerable when you're applying the zapper, because if someone sees that you put a hat on one of their buildings, they can remove the zapper. The spy's tool will go away and he'll get the zapper back so he can put it on something else. But the NG will know that there's a spy somewhere attempting to move his building.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I think the zapper would be pretty cool is it's a new mechanic that's not with any of the other zappers. I think it's balanced for the most part, other than obviously there may be some problems with like people raging at their sentry being halfway across the map.
Yeah, you might have to make it so that it has to be within a certain range, or if you really want to nerf it, within eyesight.
Yeah. Those are like, I think one really good idea is you can only move the sentry within its range, within its seeable range. And not as in like what it can see, but more of like there's a red bubble or a blue bubble that appears showing you how far the sentry can see. If you can only move it within that bubble. That would be a really interesting concept to keep it from being too OP as well.
Because then you'd have to move it just inch by inch.
And another thing, the zapper does it still allows the engineer to destroy the building. The engineer can choose, the engineer has a destruction PDA, he can choose to destroy the building, but if it's a level 3 or a teleporter, that's going to be really costly. Mm-hmm. It's gonna require him to have to build another one. Mm-hmm. And that can be really harmful in a lot of cases and scenarios. And bringing it back to the scenario from earlier, choke points, it'd be really good for choke points, because all you need to do is move it to a less effective spot. And even if you introduced it has to be within a range, I would also suggest that you allow it to shoot, remove the stun mechanic, because that way you still couldn't move it to spawn, but you could move it to a less favorable position. Mm-hmm. And so that's just a few ideas. Well, that's the hat trick in a nutshell, or the zapper that I designed. And I think it'd be really interesting for gameplay, but I don't know how exactly it would play out. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of variables.
And not to mention there's really just not many zappers. So
yeah.
Even if it's not the most interesting thing, it's still a more interesting alternative to the stock zapper.
Yeah.
Or the red tape recorder.
Yeah, and you can do a lot of fun stuff with it.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of fun things
And
to do.
NG's just getting to his building to shoot the hat, and you're like, haha, I moved it. That would be really
The
annoying.
NG has to remove it with the wrench, though.
So he gets, like, you're within eyesight. You see him pulling out that wrench, and you just teleport it.
Yeah, because there's the rescue ranger. The rescue ranger does that to spies all the time, or just pulls it out of range right before they get to put a zapper on it. And the spy being able to do that to an NG would be something that
What if it was the hat trick against the rescue ranger?
Oh, that'd be a goof. That'd be a goof and a half. Cause like, the spy would put the sentry down somewhere else, and the NG would just pick it up with the rescue ranger and then put it back down somewhere else. That would still be tactically advantageous to the spy, though, because he'd immediately get a tracer round towards where the NG is, and he would immediately know that the NG is holding the sentry, so he could chase after him and get a backstab.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of cool uses for the weapon, and I think it'd be really interesting to add it to the game to really spice up the spy versus NG war that's been going on since the game was made.
Mm-hmm. Quick question for the new players. If you are a spy and you're disguised as the other team, will your team's sentry shoot you?
No. Your team sentry knows you're a spy, and that's a dead giveaway towards advanced players.
Yeah, so if you are disguised, do not go next to your team's sentries, because then your teammates will be like, huh, they're not being shot by that.
But they won't chase you because there's a sentry in range.
Yep.
Also, it is very important to not rely on your disguise at all, because players spy check nowadays. There is a big stigma where if you're not shooting your teammates, you're shooting the enemy. Because when you're shooting your teammates, there's no disadvantage other than you losing ammo.
Yep.
And so a lot of spy checking happens. And it's important to never rely solely on your disguise. Never follow directly behind a player, even if you're going for a backstab, because if they turn around and they see that you are following them perfectly, like line to line, then they'll get suspicious and immediately spy check, because there's no reason not to.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned before, though, that if you are disguised as a scout, sometimes when they spy check your head, it actually glitches and doesn't kill you.
The visual disguise makes the scout's head here when your real head is here. So it's very unlikely that this is going to happen, but if a sniper sees you and they try and shoot the scout in the head, it won't work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all the ideas that we have for this episode.
Yep.
Yeah, we're probably going to be coming at you with some more spy weapons, because spies kind of lacking when it comes to weapons.
We've already got 2 new ones right now.
The Frenchman Finder, which is spy based, that was for the Pyro first episode. This episode we covered the Hat Trick, which is a stock zapper, or a zapper for the spy. It's not the stock.
And then we've got 2 new ones already in the works, part of the bakery set.
All right, and thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Yep.